Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Commissioner Chronicles on the DLF YouTube channel. We are back. We're going to be cranking out some videos on the commissioner issues that you have brought to me, and I have decided to cover on the DLF YouTube channel. Make sure to like and subscribe to see more content like this and lots of other great fantasy football content on the DLF YouTube channel. All right, so today on the Commissioner Chronicles, I'm going to be talking about the differences between commissioning a two-quarterback league versus the differences between commissioning a superflex dynasty league. So there's a number of different things that you might think superflex, 2QB, aren't those basically the same thing in 2022? No, there are definitely some differences between the two formats and how you would approach them as a commissioner. I'm going to talk about some of those, very small differences that can make a big difference if you're looking to maybe branch out to the 2QB land rather than the superflex one that has become more mainstream over the last several years in the Dynasty community. So the first question I think a lot of people ask with two quarterback leagues versus superflex is, should there be positional limits? Should there be a specific amount of quarterbacks that a team is allowed to have? My personal commissioner opinion is that positional limits are highly unnecessary and can be detrimental to you, especially in the time of COVID and all these injuries we've seen in recent years. It's nearly impossible, even with a deep IR or an unlimited IR, to have a positional limit, especially at the quarterback position in a two quarterback league. So what I would say with two QB leagues versus in Superflex, neither of them should have quarterback limits. You should be able to roster 2 quarterbacks or 18 quarterbacks. It shouldn't matter as long as you're able to field a lineup each and every week. That should be, what you're allowed to do. And so there's really no difference in, you don't want positional limits in 2 quarterback or Superflex, but it is something that people think, hey, since we're doing 2 quarterback, might it be a good idea to do positional limits? I would say no. Especially, if you want to add on elements like auction or Devi, those are things that complicate positional limits if you're going to attach those as well. Scoring would be my next thing. If you are going to make the transfer from Superflex to 2QB in terms of you're deciding your league should be 2QB versus Superflex, I do think that's where you implement a difference in scoring. So if you were going to do 1 point for every 30 passing yards in your Superflex league, maybe do 1 point for every 35 yards in your 2QB league. And then if you were doing, 5 points per passing touchdown, dock that to 4. If you were doing -2 for interception, bump that up to 3. In the 2QB league, you do want the 2QB to be slightly less valuable, to where if you're missing a quarterback on a given week, that doesn't mean a automatic loss. Yes, we want quarterbacks to be valuable. That's the whole point in going to the 2QB format. But if, someone has to take a 0 there, it shouldn't necessarily be the end of the world, especially because everyone is within that risk, depending on how many QBs they roster and how many, starting quarterbacks they have on their team. Next, starting injured players / bye weeks. So traditionally in my bylaws, you can't start injured players. You can't start players on bye weeks. One scenario where I might make an amendment to that rule would actually be in 2 quarterback leagues. Why? Why would that be the case? Because in 2 quarterback leagues, let's say you're in a rebuild and you have no reason other than you have to start a legal lineup each and every week. You have no reason to cut players from your RBs, wide receivers, tight ends to go essentially get, a third string quarterback from the waiver wire, because you have to quote unquote start 2 QBs every week. I think that allowing, starting injured or bye week players at the quarterback position is a viable option in order to avoid something that I think is unfair for teams that aren't contending, is when they have to make cuts in order to satisfy, fulfilling a lineup. And I know that's the case whether it's Superflex, 2QB, or any sort of format. But I do think it's a lot more common in the 2QB format, where let's say you have, 3 quarterbacks and one of them gets injured and then one of them's on the bye week, and then you're forced to make a cut elsewhere. Just because that player's injured doesn't mean they're necessarily on IR, which doesn't necessarily open that roster spot. Rarely do I want to make the exception. Okay, I'm okay with starting players that are inactive, starting players that are on bye weeks. But I think the quarterback position in 2 QB leagues, and this honestly would be, if you want to make a case against using the 2 QB format, the fact that this is kind of like a viable option and something that should be considered would be like, that's why would you do 2 QB when you could do Superflex? but there are a variety more elements of strategy involved in a 2 quarterback league. So if you are doing a 2 quarterback league, I would highly suggest at least, consider making it possible to start an injured or bye week player. That way you're not, finding people or, docking them draft picks or whatever it might be for your tanking rules. Because it's a lot harder to sustain those 2 active quarterbacks in your lineup each and every week, especially with most teams only having 2 active quarterbacks on game day. The last thing to consider with going 2 QB versus superflex is the amount of teams in your league. So if you are a 10 or an 18 league, I think it's much more realistic and much more possible to do that 2 QB format as opposed to superflex, which will then increase the viability of the quarterback position for something that definitely decreases in value as you lower the amount of teams. I think that a 12 team league is the perfect amount if you are dipping your toe into the 2 QB world. Once you go above 12 teams, once you go to 14 or 16, I think it's incredibly difficult to rationalize using the 2 quarterback format over superflex, because the more teams you have, the more flexibility you need to create, and that 2 QB format is so rigid. I would never recommend a 14 team or 16 team 2 QB league. I think you're better off going with the superflex route with that many teams. But I think 12 teams I would recommend. You can still do the 2 QB. It's kind of like both sides of the coin are fine. And then 10 and 18, I would highly suggest going 2 QB over superflex. So that's really the rundown of the differences between 2 QB and superflex leagues. If you have any questions about 2 QB and superflex differences, make sure to @ me at NPowellFF or leave a comment in the comment section. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you guys next time.
I want to let you guys know that this video is sponsored by FanDuel Sportsbook. Even though the NFL season is done, it's still a fantastic time to sign up for FanDuel Sportsbook and begin placing bets and winning some money, because you can still place bets on NFL futures like the Super Bowl winner, division winners, and the NFL draft. Prop bets are coming up here very, very shortly with the NFL draft. And they're currently offering a fantastic promotion right now where you get a $1,000 risk-free bet for first-time users signing up. So if you haven't signed up for FanDuel Sportsbook, now is a fantastic time to do so. And if you are interested, you can click that link down in the description down below to help get you guys set up and moving towards that $1,000 risk-free bet.